Okay, guys, welcome to yet another fun session on Clubhouse today. So, we have some interesting conversations coming your way this evening because we have with us someone who is a photographer, a filmmaker, an artist, a musician, and everything else that you can, probably name. His extraordinary and multifaceted career revolves around everything and anything that has got to do with creativity. He is a TEDx speaker, an educator, and the founder of the artist collective Miraki, which is based out of Bangalore. He's bagged a few awards in the International Short Film Festival circuit. He's worked on TV commercial, corporate films, advertising campaigns with various production houses, and handled several operations for the AOL Time Warner's global business. His professional work spans across wedding and commercial photography, wedding and corporate films, product walkthroughs, promos, and many more. His works have been featured in publications like Vogue, Condé Nast Traveler, Asian Photography, and many others. He's worked with national and international brands like Facebook, Bajaj, Wrangler, Westside, Taxi for Sure, and various other brands as well. We have with us, guys, someone whose portfolio has earned him the recognition as being one of the most sought-after wedding photographers in India. This is Sudeep Bhattacharya for you guys. A very warm welcome to you, Sudeep, on behalf of Wistoon's students and faculties. Thank you for joining us today and taking your time to interact with us this evening.
Yeah, my pleasure here. Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Sudeep. Welcome, Sudeep.
Thank you. Thank you.
So before we hand over the stage to you, I'd like to introduce someone else who actually needs no introduction. Mahesh Ravi is the creative and academic head of Wistoons. He is an alumni of the University of Wollongong in Australia. He carries around 15 years of experience in transmedia design, and he's an internationally recognized academician, designer, photographer, filmmaker, and a published writer. Welcome to the session, Mahesh sir.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Thank you. Thank you, Sudeep, for coming.
Hey, my pleasure to be here.
Yeah. All right. So, if we start speaking, right, we have a lot of common things to speak about. We have a lot of overlapping interest, be it film, be it, music. It could be games. It could be design, photography. But, I want to just focus on you on this session. So, can you briefly, before we start with the questions and all that, can you just briefly tell us about your career journey so far?
This is the question that I get asked often. It often stumps me. um, I would say that rather than speak about, I think Lakshmi gave a really detailed introduction on a few of the things that I've been doing. But I think broadly speaking, my career choices have been driven by a lot of curiosity. And that is probably why it has allowed me to kind of be able to go in and explore different avenues. So, I started working fairly early. I believe that, hey, at 18, if you have the right to vote a government in, you should be able to kind of, be financially independent as much as possible. So I started freelancing as a copywriter when I was 18, while I was still in college, and I was pursuing an undergrad degree in biotechnology time. And at that point in time, I was doing freelancing as a copywriter, as well as I was doing some music on the side, and worked in ads for a bit, worked in events for a bit, and I was trying out a few different things, and it's only post my undergrad where I went to AIMS for a short bit in Delhi, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, doing a project there on the genetic sequences that cause brain tumors in rats. I know it sounds very different from what I do today. But it's only when I went there and I was spending a lot of time in the labs and not being able to do other things that I was interested in, is when I thought, hey, all that stuff that I think I want to do for fun. Maybe I can, maybe I can do for a living, or maybe I can pursue that. And I thought the biggest, like a big decision I took was, leaving the sciences and going into a formal education in the arts. And like yourself, like Mahesh, I went to media school, film school in Australia. And I think I immersed myself into learning. And I think that kind of um, habit, in a way, kind of continued. I really enjoy learning. I really like, getting into places or into subjects that I don't know much about, and trying to learn more about myself and what I could do there. So I think, during film school, I wrote and directed a few short films, won a few awards, and after that, it has been a journey through filmmaking. Then after coming back to India, I decided to take a break from film and went into design. So was working in graphic design and visualizing concept art, doing photographic artwork for spaces. I did graphic design for a book called Radically Rethinking Design. And I worked with a bunch of different European design studios based out of Goa. And all of this was when I was 25. It seems again like a lifetime ago. Um, and then the opportunity with AOL, with America Online, AOL Time Warner at the time came along, and I just went in, and so with AOL, I was leading their photo editing teams, being plugged into a lot of media strategy decisions. It was essentially like running a media studio with somebody else's money, is how I like to talk about it. But it allowed me to work with a range of people. Allowed me to understand media publishing, business, strategy, how the online media world works, all the things that I had no idea about before. So I think, if you kind of like, if I have to break it down, if there's a pattern to what I do, I think that the pattern is that the only pattern is that it's usually something that I haven't done before. And that kind of trend has continued post leaving AOL. I set up my own studios in film and photography, and since then it has been working with NGOs, working with ad agencies, working with corporates, and also individual commissions. Primarily weddings and portraits and some degree of fashion and lifestyle. So, but in the midst of all of that, I was also interested in music. I was involved in working with the performing arts and shooting performers, doing sound design for some theater productions and dance productions, and also setting up a kind of an artist collective and studio space to encourage building communities around different artistic disciplines. So I know it's a lot to take in. Even when I speak about it, it feels like that. But I don't know. Does that sum it up,
Yeah,
Mahesh?
yeah, definitely. See, this is what exactly I was saying, right? We can actually talk about a lot of things. You can actually take any domain and have a full-fledged conversation with Sudeep, and he can actually talk about it for, know, a long time, because he has all those experiences, and this is great. So, but then, let's focus on photography right now, because since
Sure.
you're actually doing that currently,
Right.
uh, I just want to talk about your style of photography, because it's very unique. You play with a lot of monochromes. Your colors are very balanced. You have a particular style in contrasts. The way that you work with spaces, you use a lot of negative spaces in your photography. You
Mm-hmm.
you tend to break a lot of rules of photography. How did you basically evolve yourself into this style? When did you discover this particular style in photography? Because before this, you were doing a lot of other things. So when
Right.
did you get that time to explore this, and how did you reach this style right now?
That's a very interesting question, Mahesh. And I think I've been asked questions similarly, but I think you've phrased it really well. Um, See, the thing is, I went to film school, right? But throughout my film school years, I did not touch a camera. I was primarily writing and directing. I barely ever did any camera work. So even when it comes to photography, I'm actually a completely a self-taught photographer, and in many ways, I think that helps. Because you're it's especially when you're doing something creative, it's very see that your head can get too much in the way. And I had the problem with music. I started studying. I mean, I'm self-taught as a musician as well, and but at some point in time, I started learning music theory because I was doing some composition, and after a point, I realized that the whole intellect of the theory would get in the way of me actually making music. I think with photography, I have been in some ways lucky that that interference or that formal training did not interfere with my aesthetic. I think that was one factor that played a role. I think the other factor is also the role of photography for me has primarily been in a way, it's kind of like a passport to people's lives or to meeting someone. It is, of course, it is about the photograph, but it is also about using the position that you get as a photographer or as an observer or a witness and someone who is there with a camera to allow yourself to be in a position to engage with a conversation and a dialogue with another human being. And very often, for me, what comes out as a photograph is a result of that dialogue. So, but when it comes to specifically, if you talk about aesthetics, I would say it's been a range of influences. And again, I have a very wide palette that I listen to in music, and similarly with photography. So I really love some amazing great photographers, fashion photographers like Bharat Sikka and Prabhupada Dasgupta. I think these are the two Indian photographers that very early on, like I would see their work and I would really aspire to be able to create storytelling and narratives and use monochrome. Like especially Prabhupada Dasgupta was a huge influence, not really in terms of how I would want to shoot, but more in terms of, hey, what is the kind of photography that I like? And I think that is very important. I think, especially in today's day and age, with digital media and with Instagram and with a lot of content that we consume, it's being directed and being decided by these algorithms and these media platforms. It's not really we control very little, and I think that's why it's very important to kind of really put yourself out there and try and explore and experience all types of genres. So even in photography, right? So for example, I'm very influenced by fashion photography, and that I'm influenced by the use of color, by the use of black and whites, and the kind of the representation, how human beings or people are represented in fashion. I'm also extremely influenced by photojournalism and documentary style work, or even work like war photography, or Richard Natway, James Natway, sorry, is a photographer that comes to mind. Sebastião Salgado is another fairly well-known documentary photographer who comes to mind. And then of course street photography. There's Andre Cartier-Bresson, but I was more always interested in there's Japanese photographers who do some very interesting street photography. So one of my absolute favorites, and he's well known to be a maverick, and he was well known to break all the rules, was this guy called Daido Moriyama. So I think for me, Mahesh, what has in some way colored, because I think everything in a sense is a remix of a remix, and we are unconsciously or subconsciously colored by what we see. I think it's been this diversity of work that I genuinely enjoy watching and observing that has in some way played a role into my photography. And so therefore, if you put me into a room and you say, hey, can you like you need to make these five, or if you ask me saying you need to make five great photographs, maybe some photographers might go in immediately thinking about lines or angles or light. I think my mind does work like that, but my mind works actually immediately in terms of who is this person that I'm shooting and how can I engage with them, and is there some way that I can try and represent that interaction aesthetically? Does that answer the question a little
Yes,
bit?
yes, definitely, definitely. See, but then even though you're saying that you have all these inspirations and stuff like that, but you right now you have your own visual language. This is
Yes, yes, of
something that a
course.
lot, yeah, you have your own language, and that's beautiful. Yeah.
Right. So
So
yeah,
how
I'll just jump
are
onto
you
that.
right now current?
I'll just jump
Yeah,
onto
yeah.
that because I think that was a good jumping point. So, so when you're working as a professional, right? You are expected to deliver results time and again. You are hired to essentially you're hired to do a job, and if you don't deliver your job, you wouldn't be very good as a professional. So you need to be able to deliver consistent results for your clients, but also very importantly, as a professional creative, you need to be satisfying your own creative impulses, and you need to be able to kind of be happy with the results that you're delivering as well. um, it's not going to be very useful, and I don't think you're going to have a very long established career if you are only focused too much on giving what the client wants, because the client only knows what they know, but you are there as a creative to reinvent yourself. And I think one of the biggest things that I do to kind of push myself creatively is definitely focus a bit on personal work. This is just photographs and images that I shoot for myself. A lot of it is a lot of that. So primarily, I would say my playground, in a sense, is street photography, because I think street photography is definitely one of the most challenging genres that is out there. Of course, people call, you can take a camera onto the street and take some pictures and call it street photography. But I think for me, less than the images themselves, it's about what comes up for me in that process. Okay, so what comes up for me, the reason I like street photography is that what it's constantly facing your own fear. Okay, and it's facing your own fear as a photographer, but it's also facing your own fear as a human being. And the reason I say that, and I'm sure some of you who probably shoot on the street may relate, is if you take a camera and you go onto the street and you're pointing it, and I work really close to my subjects. I shoot wide lenses at 24 or 28 mm, so which means I'm usually less than an arm's length away from strangers, and I'm working in their face, right? So when you're working like that, and there's no way, it's a complete myth that, hey, a street photographer is invisible. That's absolute nonsense. There's no one who's invisible, especially in these days when everyone knows what a photographer is and what a camera is. But being able to navigate those spaces, because you're, in a sense, you're invading in while being on the street in a public space, you're invading somebody's private space, and but you're doing that with a hope to create an image that is powerful, that speaks something. So it's kind of like jumping through hoops of your own self-doubt, your own fear, and trying to bring in an element of play, saying, hey, don't let me not take myself too seriously, allowing yourself to fail, because those that personal work is very important, because when you're doing professional work, you don't have that kind of freedom in the professional sphere, right? You can't just really go and do whatever you want when you have someone paying you for it. But it's very important to have your own personal style. So I think a lot of my personal style, Mahesh, to answer your question, comes from that personal work that I shoot. The pictures that I take around the house. I take pictures of. I love taking pictures of textures. I love taking pictures of my dog. I love taking pictures of friends and family. I love taking pictures of street images on the street. I love playing with color. I love kind of also pushing the boundaries with trying different cameras, compact cameras, phone cameras. So essentially, I like challenging myself in the personal photography space, and the learnings that I get from there, I'm able to then apply in a professional sphere. And so for example, my style of not like breaking the rules and doing a lot of angular shots, shooting wide, that comes completely from my street photography work. My style of how I shoot brides when I shoot them, or shooting portraits of women, when how I light them, that comes completely from experimenting with some fashion. The style that when I'm shooting, say, decor, or if I'm shooting still life, that comes completely from pictures I take around the house. So I think it's an evolution, Mahesh, and I think it's an ongoing process. Until very recently, I did not even believe that I had a style, but people like you yourself come and tell me, hey, there's a style we see. So I guess there is a style. But for me, it's always about, hey, what have I not tried yet, and what can I do to push the boundaries?
This is really cool. Well articulated, and also gave me an idea to ask you the next question. So, guys, if you actually pull down and refresh the feed, you can see that I have changed my profile picture. So, Sudeep, I've just put one of your shoots of
Yeah.
people photography in there. Um, can you just tell a story about this one? I'll actually share two more photographs that I really like from your work. So
Sure.
can you just share some insights on these photographs?
Yeah, so this is actually I'm very kind of interested that you picked up this image because this is actually an image that I shot on my phone, if I remember correctly. This was shot at the top of St. Peter's Cathedral at Vatican City. Okay, so essentially, I was on the top of the dome, and if you go right, and this is obviously like this is the holiest church for the Roman Catholic movement, right? So there's obviously like thousands of people around, and it's like really crowded, and it's also gorgeous. It's really stunning, and of course, most people focus on the monument, and of course, it has every right to good subject. It's architecturally brilliant. It's been around for I don't know how many centuries. Um, but for me, what was interesting was I was kind of like on the top of this dome. It was really crowded, and there were a lot of tourists around. And I caught this guy. This guy was actually a security guard, and he was seated there, kind of by himself. Not like he had kind of purposely pulled up a chair and gone into one so that so he could stay away from the tourists. He was probably bugged by seeing tourists all day. So I just kind of sneaked up behind him, and I also loved the way the lines kind of merge, because it's just this little bit of one streak of light where he's kind of parked up there, and it's also like he looks a little bit like Stephen Hawking, in a wheelchair but without wheels. um, and yeah, and I kind of took this picture without him even knowing it, and filed it for memory. And I think a lot of it is that, right? So for example, Mahesh, like with this specific image, I really wasn't thinking about, hey, this is leading lines, or this is parallel lines, or this is black or light. I mean, I think a lot of those um, decisions or choices right now, given that I've been shooting for so long, they've become almost secondary in nature. I think I was more interested in how do I kind of show this person in the sense, in a bit of an in the isolation that he has created for himself. So for me, this picture was about him hiding in all this melee and creating that little um, boundary and corner for himself. And I think that's what the picture represents for me. Hey, I'm still around here, Mahesh?
Yes, yes, yes. I can see. So, yeah, here is another picture. This is one of my favorite pictures of you, like, now that you have shot. I think it's a bridal photography. Right now, I just updated it on my profile. I think you can see that, right?
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk about this? I really like the composition that you have done here, the idea, the story behind this photo.
So this is interesting as well, and I'm also really liking the pictures that you're picking up, because the pictures that you're picking up are actually pictures that I have not shot very consciously. Like, I've not planned them. It has been very impulsive shots. So this picture, yes, it was during this person. Her name is Zonu, and this was during her engagement ceremony at her home. And she has a beautiful house. She was just kind of like a big villa of sorts, and she was getting ready upstairs, and then once she was ready, she was supposed to come down, to the main kind of event area on the ground floor. And I had already gone upstairs. I had already shot her makeup. I'd already shot some, beauty shots and portrait shots of her. And then I came down, and like everyone else, I was just downstairs waiting for her to come down. And when she came in, I think a couple of the things that just struck out to me were two things. One was the fact that the parapet, in a way, kind of completely cut the frame, and the walls were all white. So immediately it almost looked very two-dimensional. That is one. But secondly, also, this old school radio, this transistor radio, right? Which was perched there. So it almost felt um, surreal. It felt a little like timeless, because you have something that is super vintage, which is lying there. Also, this radio was placed in a very, it was not placed in a way where you could really use it. It was kind of like kept as a showpiece. So I didn't really understand what the function was there at that time when I made the picture. But as she crossed, I just instinctive, like I said, I didn't really think too much. I just instinctively, I just felt like, hey, this is kind of cool. Like, there's a parapet, it's kind of like dividing the frame, and you have this negative space on top, and you have this transistor, which it looks very cool, like a grill at the bottom. And I think it might be interesting to kind of juxtapose these two things. And here's this is a perfect example of why being able to trust your instincts or your gut becomes very important as a photographer. I took this picture, and obviously I gave it to them, and as part of the whole set of photographs that I gave them. And she specifically got back to me saying, "Oh my God, I really like this picture because that transistor radio belonged to her grandfather, or great grandfather, who was no more, and they used to be very close. So this was in a way a memento of him. So this picture of her with this radio for her signified this connection of her with her grandfather, and who was no more, and kind of always brought up that memory. So for you and me sitting here, we could look at a photograph and analyze it aesthetically, or from a creative standpoint. But also, what makes photographs interesting, especially when it is of people, is when they become really personal and meaningful to those people. So yeah, that's the story behind this one.
Great, great, nice. So, now then, before I show you the next picture, I just want to ask you. You're also a filmmaker and you're a film buff, right? I know you have seen a lot of films from around the world, and all this knowledge in cinema, has it helped you as a photographer? Because when you're talking about your inspirations, you primarily said about a lot of photographers, street photography, and all those things. But as any filmmakers who actually influenced your style in filmmaking, because when you see the next picture, you will understand who am I talking about. Just one second. um, I hope you are able to see the picture.
1 second. Oh, yeah, of course, I remember this one.
So the frame is very cinematic to me. I mean, it reminds me a lot of Kurosawa and those kind of period films which came out in that series. I mean, have you did you actually think about it while you were shooting this, that I want to create that sort of look, or this is also a natural photograph?
Actually, I mean, that's also an interesting question. I think so. Every medium, especially as someone who has different interests and in different artistic mediums and has deep interests in them, and I'm sure Mahesh, you can also relate to a large degree. I think every medium influences us differently, you know, and I think for when it comes to cinema and when it comes to films, I think cinema in many ways, like music, is for me a medium that is more about what are the emotions that it brings up. Of course, as someone who's trained in films and as someone who makes who does commercial work as well as has done some personal work in film, of course I'm going to notice edits, and of course I'm going to notice the style of direction, and of course I'm going to notice cinematography and lighting and all the things that I've been kind of trained in, and that's very natural for the mind to kind of go into. But I think for me, when I watch a film, it's very much about how does it emotionally impact me? Like, what am I left with? And which is why actually, as a film buff, surprisingly, I'm very careful when I watch cinema, like real world cinema or cinema that I know is going to impact me. Because I feel like I need to be able to be in a mental and emotional place to allow that kind of influence and to allow that kind of that impact. And I watched a surprising amount of mindless movies. because I don't want to keep my mind on. But when I do watch cinema, I'm very engaged, and it's very, very important for me. I think um, if you had to ask me how did film influence my photography, I think primarily from a visual storytelling standpoint. Because when you get used to shooting films, or you get used to writing scripts and things like that, you understand things about setting context. You understand things like subtext. You understand how lighting impacts the mood of a scene. You understand all these aspects that go into making a film what it is. And you also understand how, especially through edits, right, how revealing or not revealing, or what you put into frame and what you put out of frame, completely can change what someone takes away from the image or from what they're watching. I think that visual storytelling aesthetic of cinema is what has carried on for me into my photography, which is why which is why I enjoy shooting photography that is a little bit more documentary style, in a way, in the sense that for me it's always about the narrative and the story, even if it is a story that I've made up in my head, because I think that does inform that. So coming to this specific image, though, I wasn't really thinking of Kurosawa or Wong Kar-wai or anyone from Southeast Asian cinema. But what I was thinking about was, I love these Vietnamese hats. This was shot in Vietnam, in a place called Hoi An. It's a beautiful town, and it was the only town that escaped from all the bombing that happened during the war. So it's kind of this quaint, very vintage French colonial town in the heart of Vietnam. So it's a very beautiful place, and of course, I love these Vietnamese hats, and also they have very interesting. Um, these coracle shaped boats, like round circular boats that they go fishing in. So for me, I think this specific image, and this was also like really early in the morning at 5:30 or something. This specific image was about how, it was more aesthetic. I think it was more about the trying to capture this unique hat, and also how it's reflected in because the hat is bamboo, the coracle is bamboo, so the material is kind of reflecting one, and then you have the sky at the back, and this person was literally pulling out fish out of the boat. So I think it was a very impulsive, very instinctive shot. I think the difference here was that I had been already shooting these fisher women for some time, and I was trying to look for an angle that I hadn't found. I was trying to find something that would make it a little bit more dramatic and a little bit more unusual, and possibly try and stick my camera into a place where people would wonder, like, how the hell did he get that picture. And so yeah, I actually shot this picture, from the hip, so I wasn't looking at my frame. I just made a mental image of what the frame would be like, and I shot it really wide. I shot it at 24 or 28 mm, and I just put my hand down into the boat and just kind of tilted the camera up and got this picture. I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but yeah, that's the story behind it.
It does. But yeah, so the point was like, the influence, right? That as a cinema, because you, being a transmedia artist, you can actually work on various mediums, right? How
Right.
this inspirations will actually, I mean, will it really carry forward, and will you be able to actually use those techniques or ideas of a different medium and
Yes,
translate it to
absolutely. In
this?
fact,
Yeah.
actually, yeah, absolutely. I think it does, and it does play a big role. And I think definitely, if you look at photojournalism, and I've done a few photojournalism workshops with a few really well-known, World Press Photo Award winners, and really like very distinguished photojournalists from around the world. And even in their mentorship, and even in how they practice, it is really, when you're pitching a photo story as a photojournalist to any magazine or any publication, it is really like, it's quite similar to a film. You have this establishing shot. You'll show the background, or you'll show the location, you'll show the environment, and then you literally do exactly what we were taught in film school, where you go wide, you go mid, you go close, you show detail, you show texture, and the only difference, I mean, actually, I would say, the similarity between, say, shooting a photo story and shooting a film is that you are choosing the sequence in which the images are revealed, right? And the only difference is that in a film, just owing to the way the film medium is constructed, you have to literally watch and wait for it to come up on screen. Whereas in a photo story, you probably have, if you watch it in a sequence, of course, you can have that, or you usually have it displayed and you're supposed to kind of go through pictures in a certain sequence. But I think, again, broadly, it's still visual storytelling, it's still narrative storytelling. I think there's definitely a good kind of synergy between these two mediums for sure.
Yeah, it makes sense. There is a non-linear approach that you can actually take in photographs, but that is not possible in films. But that techniques that the inspirations definitely actually matter, and I can see that also. I mean, when you're saying that automatically, it actually is spontaneously coming to you. It could be because of all these influences which are already there in your mind, and you know how to actually use it at the right time. So
Yeah,
right now
absolutely.
that
In fact,
yeah,
sorry, Mahesh, sorry,
yeah,
trying
sure,
to
go
remember.
ahead, go ahead.
In fact, there's a photographer. Damn, I'm so bad with names, but there's a photographer who does exactly this. There's a photographer. He must be in his like 70s, 80s now. I'm not getting the name now, but once I do, I'll probably share it here. But he does exactly this. Different frames as part of a story, and he writes a line underneath that, so it is actually like a picture story with a caption. It's like a comic, but it is a visual thing, and it's phenomenal that just how powerful that itself can be.
True, true.
And yes, like you said, non-linear shaping, changing the sequence of images, all of those things really make a difference.
True. That makes sense. So now that you have your style, are you comfortable with the style right now, or do you wish to move forward? I mean, do you still play around on your free time to try to explore new things? And then, is this just a phase that you're actually doing right now, or will you move forward with a new style? Will you invent a new medium, or maybe move to that? Or are you actually comfortable right now with this?
Well, I think, I think that's a good question. I think there's definitely a huge part, and of course, I know I'm talking about my work, and I would really encourage, or I think it would be useful for everyone who's listening in to actually go in and see some of my work, because then there is some visual context to what I'm talking about. But I think, Mahesh, it's one of the biggest challenges as a creative, as an artist, regardless of whatever medium you work in, is finding your own creative voice, right? Like finding your own unique style or unique voice. And a lot of that, finding that unique voice is to do with you making a series of aesthetic and personal choices over a period of time, saying, "Hey, I like this," versus "I don't like that," and having those different, like, I like more black and white versus I like a lot of color, or I like shooting texture versus I like shooting spaces, whatever it could be, different things. So I think it's, as the journey progresses as a creative, we end up making a lot of these choices and personal choices, which influence what eventually can in some way be termed our style. Um, and of course, that process, I think, is very important. I think what comes after shooting, as long as I have, and I've also been shooting for almost 2 decades now, like definitely like 15, 18 years I've been shooting. I think what comes now for me is better understanding those choices. So let's saying, for example, that I like, so there are some things that I know will remain. So for example, I like shooting wide. I like shooting wide because it allows me to work closer to my subject. So I like the challenge that brings. I like shooting also these dreamy pictures where I play with foreground blur, or I play with background blur. I like putting things into my frame in front of the lens and seeing how things diffract, how light changes, all of those things. I like walking the line between photorealism, which is a very documentary style, and like a dreamlike landscape where it's a little bit more abstract. So I like walking that fine line. And I think some of the choices that I've made, some of the things that are a part of my style will remain and will continue because that is very inherently me, you know. But I think there are some things that I do like to experiment with, you know, especially the use of artificial light. I periodically go through phases where I use flash and I use studio strobes, and then I work only with natural light. And I think so. I think those are more like, you know, creatively challenging yourself. Um, I'm also someone who's very interested in process on the and in the photographic process or in the visual narrative process. So as we speak, in fact, at the moment, I mean, I haven't really announced it. This is probably the first relative public announcement, but I'm in the process of setting up with a friend of mine an 18th century darkroom process where we are getting into the whole chemistry of photography and making images on glass slides and tintype and wet plate colloidin, because there it's the whole different process than digital, right? There where you're working with the chemistry of making image, you're working in the dark room. And I've also been, you know, I've been doing portraits, I've been doing digital drawing. I shall be opening my NFT marketplace fairly soon, hopefully next week. And so for me, that is another way of extending my photography work and saying, okay, I'll take pictures, but I'll use those, my own photographs, as starting points for digital paintings or digital sketches, and expanding that, because then that allows me to say, look at a photograph that I've taken, but the moment you have to represent it, you have to draw it, you have to observe it very differently. That may not be possible unless you have an actual portrait sitter, you know, which happens in art school. But here in this way, I can look at a photograph and study the light that I've taken, study the angles, and, you know, try and interpret that and represent that. So I think, yes, I think definitely there's certain aspects of the style that will remain, but there are other aspects that could be embellishments. I think that's the right word that I was looking for. Embellishments would definitely keep evolving with time.
Awesome. That seems like a very awesome process that you are going to get into, especially one with the the old native film process, and also the you getting into NFT. I was about to ask you that. I mean, are you still not there yet or something like that? But this seems like a good process. You have a plan set, which is really really cool. Now, see, one thing that everyone will, and this is something that I often, wondered about your style and trying to relate it to an industry which is really popular and it is, catering to the layman, the wedding arena. How
Mm-hmm.
did you enter the wedding arena? Because it's a very competitive field. Photography became really popular in the last decade, and a lot of photographers are there. It's oversaturated right now, and you have a very unique style, and selling that idea, that concept, to a layman is not easy, right? So
Right.
how did you actually, and but yet you found your place and you have your own position there, and you're getting recognized there and all that. How challenging was this process? Like, how did you get into this? And in the initial stages, how did you convince the clients? And how do you find those people who will understand what you're trying to do?
That's a very important and good question, Mahesh. And I think, I mean, I can answer for myself. There is no one answer because, you know, there's as you rightly said, it's an extremely competitive space, and it's also fairly oversaturated for sure. And digital photography has a big role to play in that. Um, I think see that so I think there's a few things that are important. You know, looking back, you know, when I mentor people or people who are interested in becoming a photographer, especially into weddings. I think one of the important things to distinguish is, you know, artistic or creative practice for yourself, and making a living from that. And these are two very different things. Okay, so just because you're interested, and I think this is often something that a lot of creative professionals don't speak about, or, you know, it's not a very popular thing to say in social media or publicly, that because the trending idea is, hey, do what you love and make a living from it and make a life, and everything will be amazing. But nobody tells you how, and nobody tells you what goes into making that happen. And I think that is a very important distinction, that, hey, anyone listening here, if you love something, by all means, you should pursue it. You should, put your heart and soul into it. But I think it also is important to be very realistic in not pressurizing yourself necessarily to put financial goals or career goals tied into that, because there are two very different things. You need to have your creative goals and creative mindset in one side, but the other side, you also need to be very practical and pragmatic, saying, hey, like, what is it that I'm looking to do? And am I and be willing to walk away if it doesn't work out. Okay, because the reality, Mahesh, is that especially with photography, right? Speaking specifically with photography, it is, literally everyone is a photographer these days. I think the very term photographer has changed. And I personally am not someone who, I mean, there's a lot of people who don't like that. I am personally someone who says, hey, it's great. Uh, it of course comes with its own challenges. The reason I say it's great is because, hey, if my audience is better visually trained, or if my audience, there used to be a time pre-digital photography where people could not tell the difference between a bad photo and a good photo. Now I think pretty much the average person, at least, and of course I'm talking about people with a certain degree of privilege, who have a mobile phone and who have internet access and who are looking at pictures on Flickr or Instagram or whatever is their um, media consumption platform of choice. They're definitely, when you look at thousands of pictures a day, you are going to subconsciously get educated and informed. So yes, it's great that I have an audience, or we have audiences that can understand a good picture versus a not so great picture. I think the critical part comes in, finding audiences who can understand the difference between a great picture and an exceptional photograph. Now, that's a very small subset of your overall marketplace. So the other thing that often gets lost is, you can call yourself a professional photographer, but just shooting great images is not enough. It's not going to cut it. There are literally, I'm not the only person in Bangalore or on the planet who is making great pictures. There are literally millions of people who are doing that. And there are millions of people who are doing that who are not even doing it for a living. There are millions of people who are doing that on their phones every day. It's really not that big a deal. And I think it's very easy to kind of get caught up in a little bit of like self-promotion talk, saying, hey, I'm great and I'm awesome. And yes, of course, a certain degree of being able to stand up for yourself and stand up for your own art is important. But also it's important to, when you want to make money from your art, when you want to make a living from your art, it's also important to understand that at the end of the day, you are not only providing a product, which is a photograph, but you're also providing a service. And what that means is, how you are as a person, how you're going to show up, your professionalism, your timelines, your communication skills, your people skills, your marketing skills, whatever they may be. All of these things play a big role in, achieving, a certain degree of success, however you may define it. And I think that also is a loaded word, success, right? Because, we are again fed this idea of success being, well, everyone has a different idea of success. And I think, generally speaking, material success of a certain nature is what is kind of proclaimed to be the ultimate goal. And I've had people who have come in and who have shot with me, who have interned with me, who I've mentored, people who have come in with ideas of what that life is, because social media and how, you see things online can be a big lie. It's very easy to look at my life or look at anyone photographer, filmmaker, or doing any of this media work and seeing, hey, these guys are going to these amazing hotels and they're eating awesome food and they're hanging out with cool people and they're zipping from one city to another and they're traveling the world. And while all of that is true, and I'm extremely grateful to be able to have experienced that and to be given a chance to have that. But I also have to remind myself that that is not the norm, and that's not the goal, and that's not just what it is all about. Yes, it's excellent to have, but there's a lot of hard work that goes into making that happen. And sometimes, that degree of labor may not be something that another person desires, and it is completely okay to walk away from that. And I've had a few people who came in, who worked for 3 months, 6 months, and they said, hey, you know what, like, this is way too hard, like, this is way too much labor, this is not what we signed up for. And I am completely supportive of decisions like that. So I think, uh, in many ways, it comes down to, asking yourself what kind of life you want. And I think this is a fairly, I think it's a quote by who's that right, Hunter Thompson, that, we often think about, we think about, hey, we want to do this kind of work, and then try and figure out how to build a life around the work that we want to do. I think it's important to kind of reverse the question, as he said, and say, ask yourself what kind of life you want, and then try and find out what does it take to make that life happen. And then, in the process of doing that, ask yourself, are you prepared to do what it takes? Are you prepared to make the sacrifices that to bring in that joy? And it's always a balance. It's always a balancing act. So does that answer your
Yeah,
question, Mahesh?
definitely. Beautifully articulated, and a lot of good insights that you have shared in this with this answer. This is really, really what the students will also find it really, really amusing. It's not about the material success, as you said. It depends on people, right? I mean, what they want to achieve in their life, what is their goal, and all that. And one thing which is very important that you said is that it's at the end of the day, you need to understand that whatever profession that you're doing, it's a service, right? So you need to think about that people. I mean, especially all the skills that complements the major. If it's photography, there are so many skills that needs to accompany that, like communication, marketing, as you rightly said. Um, Very informative. Thank you for that.
I think, Manish,
No,
one more thing.
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
just to underline the example, like, because I just thought about this. I'll give an example of, since we were talking of NFTs some time ago, I'll give an example of Beeple, right? Like, I don't know if everyone here or some people here are aware of who Beeple crap is. Mahesh, I'm sure you are.
yeah. We,
Yep, yep.
Right now, so now obviously, like, the internet is blowing up, and there's articles about how, he's outsold Frida Kahlo and Dali, and his work has been auctioned at Christie's, and it's gone for $69 million, and how he's this, like, hotshot artist and all of that. But, I like to, like, remember that this guy, basically, he has a job, he has a day job working as a VFX artist for an agency. He works a day 9 to 5 job. He has kids, he has a mortgage, he has his own life. And he made a promise to himself in the year 2007, which is what, like 14 years ago, that I will put out an artwork every day, no matter what. There was no NFT then, there was no $69 million then. He just made a promise to himself for his own personal artistic exploration. And he did that for 13 or 14 years straight. In fact, there's an article I read about how he even made artworks on his wedding day, on the day his kids were born. Now, that's a phenomenal degree of discipline and resilience and just, like, belief. Now, when he was putting those artworks out every day, he wasn't thinking that, hey, I'm going to sell this and be a millionaire one day, right? He was doing it from the pure joy of doing it. And I think that's very important. I think it very often, we get a little caught up in chasing I mean, because we see these success stories and they're out there, and of course they should inspire. I mean, they're hugely inspiring. But I think it's also important to always also ask, like, hey, this person is enjoying success today, but trying to imagine what did it take for them to get there. And literally, if you look at any successful artist, I mean, even if you look at painters, even if you look at the life of, say, Gustav Klimt and his brother used to work in a regular, like, portrait painting studio, and they used to paint portraits of these rich, wealthy merchants and no, royalty to get by. The style that Gustav Klimt is known for, which is Impressionism, has nothing to do with what he did for pretty much 20, 30 years which was photorealism, where he was just making portraits on commission, right? Like it was literally like a photograph portrait studio. So I think, that's also an important thing to think about, that anything worthwhile is going to take time, and are you prepared to put in the time for that? And if you don't enjoy doing it, honestly, it won't happen, and it's not worth it. Even if you get success at the end of it, if you haven't enjoyed the journey, what's the point?
Thank you, Sudeep. That was awesome. So now we don't have much time left. We can actually take one or two questions from the audience, from the students. So if you have questions, please do ask. Lakshmi, can you take? Lakshmi, you there?
Yes, I'm right here.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
I'm waiting for Darshan to join. He had a question. He had raised his hand. Just give me a moment. Okay. Sudeep, you have a hard stop in a couple of minutes, right?
No, I'm fairly flexible. I can go on. That's not a problem.
Okay. But we'll keep it short. We'll stick with
Sure.
one or two questions and then we can wind up. Okay, so before we get someone, to speak to you, I'd like to ask a very quick question, okay? It's just a fun question. So what is this one, frustrating question that you get about being a wedding photographer?
Well, that is the question itself, that are you a wedding photographer, right? Because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because I think if you met me in 2011, 2000, I got into shooting weddings very accidentally. And if you met me in 2011 and asked me, "Hey, would you shoot weddings?" I would say absolutely not. So here
Mm-hmm.
we are, 10 years later, me eating my own words. I think I generally am a little uncomfortable with the idea of labels. And I think that's because I have varied interests. And I think also, when you go to a party and you step in, usually the first question people ask you, what do you do? Right? And, in terms of our own identity, what we do essentially for a living has become so important in defining who we are. And I think I like to switch it over, and I would rather ask person, who are you? Like, what are your interests? And then ask, what do you do for a living? Right? And the person could do one or two or five or 10 different things. So I think that question, whenever people speak about saying, hey, you shot this wedding and all of that. Like earlier, I used to get a little bit more riled up. Now I just let it slide.
Okay. All right. Mohit, do you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Actually, listening to you, most of your works, you've told you based it on your instincts and you built your instincts over time. And at a moment, even when you were doing music or whether it was photography or music, theory was coming in the way. At what point did you find that, okay, this is too much? Because theory, there's a theory behind everything. Like if you want to get into it, so what at what point made you decide, okay, I can figure out what's working and why is it working, but I should go with my instinct instead?
Right. I think two things. That's a good question, Mohit. I think two things. One is, um, I think a very, very basic degree of uh, understanding this is asking myself if I'm having fun, you know, and if I'm not having fun in the process, in the creative process, there's something wrong. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes when you're doing commercial work and you have crazy deadlines and a lot of pressures and 10 people sitting on your head, then the fun element can go down. But the fun element goes down because of outside circumstances and people, not yourself. You yourself creatively might still be, wanting to give your all. I think when in a creative process you find that you yourself have created some kind of a restriction that is inhibiting your enjoyment of that process, I think that is where for me it becomes a concern, where I ask myself, hey, why am I not having fun here? Why am I not enjoying this? Because that for me is very important, because at the end of the day, I always say, time is the only real currency. You might as well, it's better that you try doing something you love and enjoy the process of it and fail, rather than try something you don't love and don't enjoy and then fail anyway. You could fail either way, but you might as well have fun along the way. So I think that for me, Mohit, has been a very important determinant. And secondly, as a consequence of that, is the ability to walk away. And when I say walk away, I mean walk away from a certain discipline, walk away from certain um, um, choice of medium. So, for example, I was doing music a lot more. I got to a point where I wasn't really enjoying doing it professionally for clients or for someone else. And so I completely cut off and walked away from it, saying, okay, you know what? I will not do music for money. I will not do music commercially. Even though I had the skill set to, right? Similarly, I think in many ways for film, like taking a decision saying, okay, I'm not going to work in Bollywood, or I'm not. So I think like me being able to say no and make those choices along with asking yourself if you're having fun. These two are the most important takeaways for me.
Nice, nice. Like reinventing yourself when it's necessary. You have to figure it
Yeah,
out. Cool. That's framed really well. Thank you for that.
sure. You're welcome.
All right. So, Sudeep, I think we can wind up now. Thank you so much for this lovely session. I think, we've learned a lot. And I feel that your approach is not just for photography. I think if someone heard this conversation that we were having just now, they could apply it to any field that they're working in it, and it's not limited to just photography or anything specific. It's beautifully put across. Thank you so much for that, Sudeep, and thank you so much for your time. And thank you, everybody, on the session today for taking this time out on a Saturday, um, joining us.
Yeah, it was absolutely, I'll just say it was just like my absolute pleasure to be speaking here. And I think, thank you guys for being patient, for inviting me, and also some very interesting questions. And of course, I know that we're short of time, but I'd also, at any point, I'm someone who really enjoys talking about these subjects, talking about creativity, creative community, mentorship, all of these things. So please feel free to also reach out to me either on Clubhouse or Instagram is probably the easiest for most people these days. I'm very happy to continue the conversation and answer any questions if someone has at any later point.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Sudeep.
All right, guys. So we can wind up now. Good. Have a good rest of your evening and have a nice weekend, guys.
Have a nice weekend, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.